Good evening, and welcome to the Church of the Redeemer. I'm David Ware, a member of the clergy team here. It's so good to see all of you all out on a wet and windy evening. Thank you for coming to this second in a series of voices. Tonight we welcome Tim Schenck, who's the rector of the Church of Bethesda by the Sea in Palm Beach, Florida. And I know some of you all sometimes find your way down there. So if you don't know the way to Bethesda by the Sea, Tim will tell you after he's through speaking. He grew up in Baltimore, attended the Church of the Redeemer prior to being ordained. He served parishes in Maryland, in New York, and Massachusetts, and now Florida. You all may remember I told a story of the hottest wedding I ever officiated at was in his old stomping grounds in, is it pronounced Hingham? Hingham. Yeah, the Unitarians don't have air conditioning, and that's why they don't have church in the summer. But they invite unsuspecting Episcopal clergy to officiate at weddings.
So you were at Old Ship?
Hotter than the hinges of hell, as they say.
Old Ship? Is that where you were?
I mean, I did it once,
Yeah.
and it was 1,000,000 degrees, and my wife was singing in the balcony, so...
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm sure that wasn't your church. Y'all probably know how to blow. You knew how to blow cold air in your place.
Yes, we did while I was there, just before I left, we did a capital campaign, and we have air conditioning there now.
Amazing. If you want to win the hearts of your people, heat them up and cool them off. So Tim is also has a following because of his work with Lent Madness, which is an online devotion series, but it's really a whole lot of fun and an interesting way to learn about leading figures in the history of the faith. Tonight, he's going to be discussing his book, Devotions for People Who Don't Do Devotions. Tim, welcome.
Great. Thank you so much, David. Thank you. Well, I feel very, very comfortable here for a couple reasons. One is because I grew up here, but the other reason is because, like all Episcopal churches, nobody is sitting in the front row. And so that makes me feel very, very comfortable. But I'm delighted to be here. I'm so grateful to David for inviting me to come up. Not very many people leave Palm Beach in February, but apparently I do. And I also I assume that I'm not only here because my mother nagged David for me to be here, right? But I'm glad my mother is here, Lois Schenck, and my brother Matt is also here. So, but it's a joy to join you briefly on your Lenten journey. I have so many memories being here at the Church of the Redeemer and looking at this gorgeous stained glass window and the cross embedded in it. But I mean, this place is, my very first memories of Sunday school were from here. I remember talking to the Sunday school teacher after hearing about Adam and Eve and saying, well, how do dinosaurs fit in with Adam and Eve? And so this was just one of these incredibly nurturing places that allowed you to ask some probing questions and recognizing that it's okay not to always have the answers to every question, that the life of faith includes mystery as well, and that God often is found in the midst of the questions. And so I've never forgotten that. But also, let's see, my mother sang in the choir here. I can picture her in the robes. I think the choir sits there, right, still. We were just talking, I went to the parish day school, right? Went there. I remember my father conducting all sorts of special music with Arthur Ray and doing that. I remember, of course, my father's funeral was here. He's out in the columbarium. I remember walking into Jim Crowder's office one day and saying, I'm feeling something, can we talk? And 6 years later, being ordained a priest. And I was ordained first at the cathedral right here, and then the very next day, the very first time that I ever served in any capacity as an ordained person was right here. And so this place is very special to me. The roots are deep here, and there will always be a special place in my heart for the Church of the Redeemer. So it's great to be here. I know David did a little bit of a background. I'm going to share just a little bit about my journey, because I think that our experiences and our faith lives are so intertwined. And so just to give you a little bit of context about me, a little background about me, I grew up in Baltimore, and while I have moved away so many times, I still consider Baltimore home in a very real way. And, of course, everybody in Baltimore, when they ask what school you went to, they're not asking what college you went to, right? So did that school here, and then high school in New York, which was a real culture change, going from Gilman and the sprawling fields to a 13-story building in Brooklyn. So a little bit different. Went to college in Boston. I worked on political campaigns for a living for about 3.5 or 4 years, kind of all over the country. But a couple of them here in Maryland. One was, the first race I ever worked on was a city council race in East Baltimore, and we kind of helped to bust up the machine, and that was exciting. And then I worked for Senator Mikulski when she was doing her re-election campaign in 1992. I didn't actually bring that up at a recent funeral that I did in Palm Beach, which was for Melania's mother. But anyway, that's a whole other story. And then off to seminary in Evanston, Illinois. I came back. I was the curate at Old St. Paul's, right downtown Baltimore, for 2 years, and I loved being back here. And after 2 years at Old St. Paul's, I went to be the rector of a church in Westchester County, about 20 miles north of the city. And then from there, I went up to Hingham, Massachusetts, which is on Boston's South Shore, where I was for 14 years. And at a certain point, it was like I went from Maryland to New York to Massachusetts, and I'm like, what, the next stop, Canada? What's happening here? So I had to put an end to that, and somehow ended up in Florida. Now, I'm someone who always swore that I would never live in Florida. But I find that when you tell God things like that, when you give God ultimatums, suddenly you find yourself standing under palm trees, and here we are. So I've been the rector at Bethesda by the Sea for 15 months now. It's an amazing place. It's a complex place. It is yes, beautiful grounds and buildings and all that, but there's some wonderful people there, just faithful, interesting, fun. Sometimes people will say to me, so what's it like living in Florida? And I'll say, I don't really know, because I basically moved to New York. Everybody's it's sort of the sixth borough down there, but that's okay. It's all great. But to all of that, I have 2 boys, Ben and Zach. Ben's our oldest. He's almost 25. Zach just turned 23. They're both still in Massachusetts working. And so basically, we said, boys, here are the snow shovels. Good luck, we're leaving. And we drove south. But they're doing great. and was just up there a couple weeks ago, which was fun. Written a few books along the way. I keep telling people that this is my 5th book, and I said that for so long until I was on the plane here today, and I was kind of looking at the stuff, and I'm like, oh my God, it's actually the 6th one. So, which doesn't say a whole lot about my credibility up here, but nonetheless, the books that I write tend to be kind of an intersection of life and well, real life and faith is really what I try to do with these things. The only sort of exception, outlier, is I'm kind of a coffee guy, and I went on sabbatical a few years ago, and I wrote a book about the intersection between coffee and faith, and it's called Holy Grounds, because what else would I call it, right? And it's fun. It was I got to visit some coffee farms in Central America. I went out to Seattle, because you can't write a book about coffee without going to Seattle. I spent some time with some Orthodox monks who, in the Poconos, who roast their own beans and sell coffee as burning bush coffee. And so I had all sorts of adventures, but also it was a lot of research, a lot of history, looking at the use of coffee through Islam, which is where coffee came from, the Islamic world. It was first used to fuel night prayers in these Islamic communities. So it started as a prayer thing, and then looking at it through Judaism and Christianity as well. But so I'll talk about this book a little bit, and I'll read a few excerpts. Read a few excerpts that probably have to do with Baltimore. But I'll get into that in a minute. I just wanted to say just a little bit about this season of Lent. And I am so glad that you are all here, that you are walking this Lent. Is this going to fall down? What's happening? Did I say something? I'm used to snow like cascading off the roof up in Massachusetts, but Lent. You know, one of the things about this season of Lent is that I love the season of Lent. I know for a long time it's kind of been seen as the church's season of depression, right? You know, nobody really looked forward to Lent. It was kind of seen as a season to just kind of get through and get over with, so we can, you know, get the right cross back and get the flowers again and say the A word that I'm not allowed to say, because I would get struck down if I said that during Lent. But I think that there is nothing more joyful than a season specifically set aside to draw yourself and a community closer to God. I mean, that's what Lent is. And that's an amazing thing. We talk about spiritual disciplines, right? Well, at the heart of the word discipline is the word disciple. And so it really is about following Jesus. That's what being a disciple is, and that's what we recommit to every Lent. And so Lent for me is not about kind of being miserable and looking miserable and rubbing dirt on our faces and eating twigs. Not that there's anything wrong with that, I guess, but it's you know, one of the proper prefaces for Lent in the Eucharistic prayer talks about preparing with joy for the Paschal feast. And I think that's what Lent really should be. And if there's one thing that I'm hopefully helped over the years to do, is to kind of reconfigure and reboot a little bit about what this season of Lent is. And that's really why I started, David alluded to it, Lent Madness. Do any of you know about Lent Madness? A few. So Lent Madness is this crazy thing. It's in its 15th year, which I can't really believe. But I take 32 saints and I put them in a basketball-style bracket. And then throughout the weekdays of Lent, people vote for their favorites. And it goes on. You go from the first round of 32 to the saintly 16 to the elate 8 to the faithful 4, and finally a single saint wins the golden halo at the end. Now, the whole concept is patently absurd, of course. All of these saintly people have received their crown of righteousness already. But it really is a way of learning about the lives of some people who have followed Jesus in their own day and in their own way. And I think that if we can derive some inspiration for our own journeys, then that's really what it's all about. So, but by all means, lentmadness.org, it's going on now. You can take on your phone. I think today is, sometimes we do interesting different pairings. Today it's Rita versus Zeta, just because it rhymes. I don't know. But you can read about the two different saints, and then you can vote. And it's a lot of fun. Ultimately, it's an online Lenten devotional, and usually there's about 7,000 people vote across the country and every day. And so it's a lot of people learning and being inspired. So that's kind of the hope. But the whole idea is that, and this is really what I try to convey in my books, in my preaching, in my writing, is that it's all about we can take our faith seriously, but we don't have to take ourselves too seriously. You don't have to. Being a Christian should never be grim. It should be joyful, right? So this book, Devotions for People Who Don't Do Devotions. And it's a kind of a funny title, but it was the concept that I came up with. There are 50 devotions, a little sentence of scripture, a reflection, and then some reflection questions that follow. And I think the best thing that I'll do to kind of frame what this book really is I'll read the introduction. So, settle in. All right. I'm not a big fan of devotional books, the kind you get for Christmas from your Aunt Thelma, whose big smile always comes with a side of judgment, with titles like Devotions for Dads or 365 Daily Devotions to Strengthen Your Marriage. She's not so subtly trying to fix what she thinks is wrong with you by jamming religious books into your stocking. Maybe it's the saccharine, sweet, holier-than-thou tone of most of the devotionals I've browsed in the religion and spirituality section at Barnes & Noble. Okay, most of those were put out by Joel Osteen, Inc. But still, there's a Ned Flanders-esque vibe to many spiritual books that leaves you wondering if the people who write them even inhabit the same planet. And surely that's not helpful for those of us seeking the divine presence in the midst of our daily lives. So here are a few things you should know about this little book. First, there are not 365 devotions. Frankly, I'm just not that prolific. But mostly, I don't want this book to become a source of spiritual guilt, staring at you from your nightstand, begging you to read 12 straight devotions in a single day just to catch up. Rather, I hope you take as much time with each devotion as you like. That may be 30 seconds or it may be a week. If the words resonate, lean into them. If they don't, turn the page and keep moving. These are meant to be starting points, not megaphone-style declarations of certainty. The hope is that you will bring your own experience and imagination to these brief reflections, and that through engagement with them, they will offer some inspiration and perspective. You can certainly read these through a profound theological lens, but that's not really the point. I've tried to simply offer small morsels of real life to be chewed upon. Some will be more flavorful for you than others. Those are the ones to spend time with and savor. Following each devotion, you'll find a brief section called Reflect and Engage. You can think about these questions on your own, perhaps with your morning coffee or afternoon tea. Better yet, find a small group of friends or fellow seekers and use these prompts as jumping-off points to get to know one another and God in deeper ways. I firmly believe that God is often most present just beneath the surface of the visible world. If we have eyes to see the divine hand at work in the day-to-day interactions and experiences of our lives, in both the mundane and the miraculous, our lives will be forever enriched. I pray our journey together will help you see things that so often remain unseen. And in so doing, perhaps this process will help you unlock your own unique ability to glimpse God in your daily life. So that's the basic kind of basis of this book. I just I get tired of spiritual books that seem untethered from life, and so I mean that's where we live our life. That's how we live out our faith. And again, it's that it's intertwining of our experiences in life and our faith journey. You can't pull them apart. You know, there's one of my favorite bumper stickers that I've ever seen says, "There is no secular world." And I love that because it's a reminder that God is present everywhere, that God is present in the mundane and the miraculous. And that's the way, I think, to be able to go through life. So you can point to, it's not that everything's going to be great, but you can point to things. Sometimes it's in retrospect, sometimes it's in the moment, but you can say, okay, that's where I see the divine hand in this. So that's kind of the point. I hope that this can be a little interactive too. So, because if it's not, then this will turn into some contemplative silence at some point. Which we don't, I mean, it's Lent, which is all good, but we don't necessarily want that. But so I guess I'd ask if, what are your experiences with devotional books? Does this approach resonate, or do you think I should just stick to the regular devotions? I mean, it's too late if that's what you think, but yes.
In reply to your question, I don't read devotional books.
Great.
Maybe you'll tell me where I've gone wrong.
You haven't gone wrong. I think that there's no one way to approach the life of faith. I just know that, and I don't mean to disparage every other devotional book ever written. I mean, that's surely not my point. There's some wonderful ones out there, but for those who are looking for something a little bit different, then this might resonate. And so I'd encourage you to, well, I'll read a few excerpts, and then you can decide if you want to buy one afterwards. But yeah. Yes.
Devotional books, and I love that you've given us permission to just move on if it's not speaking to you. And I've just have put this devotional book down because it just didn't, rather than going on to the next or what have you, I just thought this is not working for me. So I'm anxious to see your book, and I like your approach.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's okay. I mean, I think it's the same way with, with even a novel. You know, sometimes we need permission to stop reading it. You know, and for those of us who for whom that feels like failure, sometimes that's hard. But then I think, well, no, that's probably wisdom, not failure. So, well, I guess why don't I read an excerpt, and then we can kind of see. So this first one I'm going to read. Again, I'm picking a few that, well, this one in particular seems apropos for Lent, but it's also a little bit of Baltimore in here too. So this one's called Tuning Peg, and the scripture is from Hosea. But as for you, return to your God, hold fast to love and justice, and wait continually for your God. When I was a kid, I would sometimes tag along with my father to orchestra rehearsals. He was a conductor with the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra in the 1970s, and so when a babysitter got sick or my mother was working, I'd accompany my dad to the old Lyric Theater downtown. When I wasn't hanging out in the dressing room with the poker-playing horn players or wandering backstage among the huge double bass cases and assorted timpanis, I'd be out exploring the red velvet-lined boxes in the balcony. You could say that one of the soundtracks of my childhood was the tuning of the orchestra. If you've ever been to a classical music concert, you know that they all start with the same ritual tuning. After a nod from the concertmaster, the principal oboe player gives them an A, and then the rest of the orchestra tunes their instruments off of the oboe, which of all the instruments provides the truest pitch. This process takes just a few minutes or moments, but the tune-up starts the rehearsal and then is repeated periodically if the conductor hears something that doesn't sound quite right. Over time, instruments naturally get out of tune if left alone. Strings in particular are very sensitive to cold or humidity. A violin string might stretch out, causing it to go flat, or constrict, causing it to go sharp. And so a violinist must do a bit of fine-tuning with the pegs to get the instrument back in playing condition. We, too, occasionally find ourselves out of tune spiritually. As our priorities become slightly off-key, it's important for us to find ways to, again, live in harmony with God. The truth is that it's easy to let our spiritual lives get away from us. We get busy. We get self-absorbed. We get bogged down by endless activities. We let the minutia of life drive our priorities, and suddenly we find ourselves out of tune with the Spirit. It might be subtle to the point that we hardly notice our spiritual life has gone a bit flat, or it might be strident, atonal disharmony. But either way, we need to seek ways to bring our spiritual lives back into tune through self-reflection and a return to the basics of our faith. Pay attention to the occasional need to retune your spiritual life. Needing tweaks is a natural phenomenon that affects even the most devout among us. We can't fix everything in our lives or in the world, but we can attend to the stirrings of our souls. And by doing so, we can be bearers of God's grace in uncertain moments. We can drive out fear with hope. We can offer love in the face of oppression. This is what will transform us, being in tune with God and walking in harmony with one another. And so that whole sense of Lent, that this season of Lent as being a retuning of our spiritual lives, kind of a recentering, a call back to the essentials of our faith. That's the great opportunity in Lent, I think. And I don't know, what do you all think? Any thoughts about Lent Any musicians here? Anyone ever been with an orchestra that tuned? Yes. The microphone is... Yeah. Yep. Yeah. No, I think that's exactly right. It's accountability, right? I mean, Jesus called disciples together, called us he called people together in community. He didn't call individual, isolated ways. And I think that's exactly right. I also am struck by two things you said. One is reading out loud. That doesn't happen a whole lot anymore. I mean, it happens when you have little kids, right? And then after that, when does it happen? So I love the idea of reading out loud. I mean, we certainly do that in church. I mean, that's what we do. I'm always trying to get people to put the bulletin down. Don't necessarily read along, but put it down and listen to the Word of God being proclaimed, because it's different when it's being read to you in that way. It somehow comes alive a little bit more. It becomes more of we accept it more as something of the heart. And so I love that. And the other thing that you said is that you pause and look at one another. I love that. That's beautiful. And I guess I'd have to tell my wife if I'm going to do that. Otherwise, she'd be like, "What are you looking at me for?" But I love that. So thank you for that. Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah.
I picked up one of your books,
Thank you.
and I went to the table of contents, and the one that jumped out at me was the one titled Garbage.
Was which one?
Garbage.
Oh, Garbage Time?
Garbage time, yes. And so on page 30, there's a sentence I'd like to read. Silence forces me to step off the metaphorical treadmill, walk away from my electronic devices, and reflect upon the often taken for granted blessings for life. And I thank you for this book and for coming here, because there are a few words here: the gift of brevity, and meditation and silence allows us to open up, to listen to God and to ourselves. And it's that intersection that is so helpful. And so I want to thank you for that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Silence is such a rare commodity in our lives. We can fill our days with noise, and there are days when it's all noise, and then we come home and we put Netflix on, and I get it. I like to do that too. I'm tired, but it is more noise. And sometimes I find myself not only watching Netflix, but also scrolling social media as I'm watching Netflix. And that's it's terrible. I tell myself I'm multitasking, but silence, cultivating silence in our lives is such an important spiritual discipline. One of the things I've done for Lent, I'm not huge on giving stuff up, but what I've done for many, many years is I never put the radio on in the car during Lent. And it's interesting to see what sort of bubbles up when you do that. Granted, I live next door to the church, so my commute isn't very long. So there's that. But wherever I'm driving around, I just, I see what emerges. Sometimes it's a line from a hymn will just kind of bubble up, or sometimes it's prayer. It's thinking about other people. So I highly encourage you to be intentional about finding some silence in your life. Case in point. Well done. Excellent. All right. I can read another one of these things. Here's one called Angel's Share. Bless the Lord, you angels of his, you mighty ones who do his bidding and hearken to the voice of his word. That's from Psalm 103. One summer when I was back home in Baltimore visiting family, we toured a whiskey distillery. This may seem like an odd family outing, especially since only 2 of the 5 cousins were actually of legal drinking age. But it was a rainy day, and we needed an indoor activity. So after breakfast, we headed down to the Sagamore Spirit Distillery in South Baltimore. Any of you ever been there? Yeah, pretty good stuff. I didn't realize that before Prohibition, Maryland was the rye whiskey capital of America. The industry didn't consolidate into Kentucky until after World War II. Maryland-style whiskey was a thing, and several boutique distilleries are seeking to bring it back. Baltimore scribe and whiskey enthusiast H.L. Mencken was a big fan, calling Maryland whiskey the most healthful appetizer known to man. We can debate that, but I find the process of distilling spirits both fascinating and mysterious. The mashing and malting, fermenting and aging is part science project and part art form, often conducted by large apron-wearing bearded men. But the aspect I love the most happens inside those wooden barrels. As part of the aging process, a small percentage of the liquid evaporates. In fact, 2% of what's inside the barrel evaporates for every year that it's aged. This is both a blessing and a curse. It means that a portion of the whiskey is lost, but it's only through the aging process that the whiskey develops its unique flavor and character. Distillers refer to this lost portion of whiskey that dissipates into the heavens as the angel's share. I love this phrase. It invites me to consider how I offer my angel's share. How do I give back to the world a small share of the joy, peace, and goodwill that surrounds me through my faith? How do I return a share of the Spirit that angels in our midst have entrusted to me? The word angel literally means messenger in Greek. This makes sense because that's what angels do. They bring messages from God. The archangel Gabriel announces to Mary that she will bear God's Son, and the Christmas angels praise God and proclaim peace on earth and goodwill to all people. Perhaps we can offer our own angel's share by acting as messengers of peace and goodwill in the lives of all we encounter. Through our actions and interactions, we can bring messages of kindness or compassion, love, or friendship. Opportunities to offer our own angel's share abounds. When we pray without ceasing, when we offer compassion, when we lift the lowly, when we work for justice, when we reach out our hands in love to those in need, we offer up our angel's share. When we share our faith with others as an invitation to come and see what gladdens our hearts, we offer up our angel's share. When we allow our hearts to be moved by Jesus' message of peace and love and then act accordingly, we offer up our angel's share. Cheers, friends. So, again, it's, I just find that God's all around us. You can find God at a distillery in South Baltimore. And if you can do that, you can find God anywhere. We just need eyes to see and ears to hear. And again, I'm happy to entertain reflections on that or thoughts on that, or you may tell me that, what are you doing going to distillery and, with your underage children? So, yeah, yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's right. Is the beer any good? Because I've had some terrible home brews over the years, but also some very good ones. But I think that's right. I think that there are certain rituals that we go through. And often when we think about rituals, we think about this stuff, right? We think about rituals, holy rituals, sacred rituals. But I think that it's so important to expand the definition of what is a sacred ritual, because there are ways that that some of the routine things that we do during our own daily lives can be seen as sacred acts. Again, I'm a coffee guy, and so that whole ritual of brewing coffee in the morning. Now, granted, sometimes the only prayer that I say while I'm brewing my coffee is, "Dear God, make this hurry up." But often it's the ritual. So I use a. This is going to be way too much information, but I use a Chemex to brew my coffee. So it's a pour-over method. Yes, I grind the beans and weigh the beans, and so ignore that. But to me, that's the ritual, and so it can be a time of silence and contemplation. All of these little things that we do, it can be a daily walk. It can be, it can be even cleaning, or doing the dishes. I'm not very good at cooking, but I'm good at doing the dishes. And there's something meditative about that. If you not every time, but if you're able to put yourself in that frame of mind, that this is holy work. I love kind of the Benedictine approach. Saint Benedict, who was the 4th century sort of father of Western monasticism, and the whole concept that he brought was kind of body, mind, and spirit. He was kind of New Age before New Age was a thing, and he would talk about every object being a holy implement. So the monk that was going out to the field to hoe, whatever you hoe, using that, seeing that hoe as a holy object, as holy as a sacred chalice. You know, and it just kind of reframes what we're doing and how we're doing it, and it puts us in this mindset of this is all God, this is all God's, and let us rejoice and be glad in it. So, yes.
Okay. In your book, Holy Grounds, did you discuss the difference between the coffee ritual you've just described that you perform and popping a Keurig pod into an electric machine and the ramifications of that?
Yes. So two things. One is I am never judgmental about how people like their coffee. If you like to scoop coffee out of a giant Folgers tin and you enjoy it, that's great. Please don't invite me over for coffee, but that's fine. As I like to say, it's God's house, not Maxwell's house, which is why I like to serve good coffee at church. But the whole sense of ritual and pods. I'm not a big fan of pods, but nonetheless, we all have different rituals, and whatever connects you to God, that's not for one person to say is the right way to do it or the not right way to do it. I have some environmental concerns with pods, but that's also another question. Any other questions about coffee? That's my wheelhouse. No. Yes, Dick.
Dick. Wait.
How do you see the role of meditation as you're building this relationship in the everyday lives as you relate in your book? It seems to me meditation can play a key role as you're bringing focus to whatever you're about.
Yeah, that's a great point, the question about meditation. Meditation, if it works for you, absolutely lean into it. It doesn't work for everybody, but again, there aren't spiritual disciplines aren't a one-size-fits-all proposition, right? But there are so many these days meditation apps that you can get on your phone, but it's all figuring it. I always encourage people to try as many different spiritual disciplines as they can and see what really resonates. Now, you can't just try it once. You got to kind of try something a few times and give it a chance to see if it produces fruit within you. But meditation is a great way I think it's so that the value of stilling our minds. You know, our minds are so busy all the time. And it's why a practice like contemplative prayer, you can't just kind of do it once and say, oh, I kept thinking about my grocery list and I'm spinning about. That's going to happen. But in contemplative prayer, that sense of silence, it's all about returning to a mantra or to a particular word to kind of recognize that it's okay. Okay, my mind went over here, but now I'm bringing it back. And then again, my mind went over here, but I'm bringing it back. And so again, you can spend your entire life and stay in the noise and never really look deeply inward. But I just don't think that that's a particularly fruitful way to live. Should I dip back into the book? Okay. See what else I got. This one is this one's called Science Class. And this this was Gilman, just so you know. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. When I was in 6th grade science class, the highlight or lowlight, depending on your perspective, of the entire year was dissecting a fetal pig. The usually dour Mr. Nip took great glee in teaching us to slice open the specimens, and he had zero tolerance for squeamishness. I remember one classmate turning green and on his way to the bathroom being pelted by a spare eyeball, courtesy of Mr. Nip. Such was the learning environment at an all-boys prep school in Baltimore in the early 1980s. What I most remember about the experience, besides the sudden realization that I would never become a doctor, is that the heart was gross. Actually, everything on the inside was gross, but I had high hopes for the heart. The heart is held up as the symbolic life force of every creature, but the heart of my fetal pig wasn't even red. It was just another piece of foul-smelling gray goo. Not exactly the stuff of Valentine's Day cards. Jesus mentions the heart a fair amount when highlighting the essence of a person's hopes and desires. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. And where your heart is, there your treasure will be. When it comes to our spiritual lives, our heart matters. It is the heart of the matter. Now, if you dig into the Latin, the word for believe, credo, derives from the word corda, meaning heart. This is why to believe in something literally means to set your heart upon it. Jesus encourages us to set our hearts upon God, to give to God our trust, devotion, and love. This isn't always easy, but doing so, or even attempting to do so, keeps us grounded and connected to God. The heart may have evolved into a long-standing metaphor for our very being, and that's frankly where I'd rather keep it. I'm glad there are gifted cardiologists out there, but I prefer to stay in my lane when it comes to matters of the heart. I'll keep encouraging people to give their hearts to God. The other thing I remember about Mr. Nip was that he taught his classes while holding a wooden yardstick. If you weren't paying attention, whack! He'd smack that thing on your desk, which was almost enough to make your heart stop. I still had a good experience there. Thanks, Mom, for sending me to... By the way, my brother Matt is here as well, and this book is, actually the dedication is to him. So I'm sure that after we're done, he would be happy to autograph every copy of the book, yes. So, yes.
You like to write, you've written a lot of books. I kind of like to write and reflect too, not to be published, but to kind of read it again at another time. And I just appreciate that you've given us a kind of like an outline in an English class. You've given us a kind of framework to not just only reflect on whatever in our daily life, but to think about maybe writing down and reading it again. I like that idea. I mean, I bet you could write 100 of those that you have there. You had to distill it down, I'm sure.
Well, no, thank you. It's true that writing is another of the spiritual disciplines, and some people love to journal, and I think if that's something that helps you reflect, I know that for me it's helpful to write things down just to kind of process things or get my thoughts out or make sense of things. So, so that works for me. And do any of you journal? Yeah. And do you go back to them? Do you see what you've written, or do you kind of write it and that's got it out of your system, like you wrote that really angry email and then you just deleted it, but you got it out of your system? So, but again, journaling's a form of prayer. You know, I always think it's important to broaden the definition of what a prayer is. And sometimes, well, very much, not sometimes, I mean, being in silence is a form of prayer. You know, God already knows what's on our heart, right? So at some level, I think sometimes we let our words get in the way of that or become a barrier, or we think like, well, if I don't use the exact correct words or the most eloquent, I mean, we're Episcopalians, we want to use eloquent words, right? And that's, we don't need to. You know, those sighs too deep for words, that's prayer. I don't know, any other questions? I know we don't have too much time left, but any other questions about anything? Life, Redeemer. I could talk about stewardship. Would that be helpful? Have you gotten your pledge cards in? Actually, one of the funny things is, I know you all have because it happens in the fall, like most churches. In Palm Beach, stewardship season can't happen in the fall because so many people are seasonal and they're not back yet. So we actually do it in January, which is interesting. So it's still stewardship season. That's why it's on my mind. But it's also never too late to get in a pledge card if you haven't pledged, right, David? Okay, I'm just saying. Yeah. We could keep talking about stewardship. Do you have any capital campaigns coming up? Should we talk about that? Any other thoughts, points for the good of the order? Yes?
A friend of mine is a practicing psychiatrist, and he has a comment on silence in answering people's questions or whether you answer yes or no. And he sometimes says, sometimes there's nothing to say.
Sometimes there is nothing to say. And I think that I'm especially aware of that when I'm walking with someone who's struggling or someone who's grieving, that we don't have to say a lot of words. Our presence speaks louder than that. And sometimes a hug is the best word. So, well, I've loved having you all here. Thanks for coming out on a rainy night. And I know that if you are interested in books, I know they have some in the narthex. You still call it the narthex?
We do.
Okay, good. Okay, we love those. We love those churchy words. I love that. And I'm if anyone would like to chat after this, I'll be milling around. So
Thank you,
so
Tim.
much.